This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Putting faces with the names of those on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. We talk about a planned education center on this edition of Conversations. It's hard to imagine a memorial more moving and inspiring than the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. But past those names etched on that famous wall are the faces and personalities of real people, men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice. The goal of the Education Center at the Wall is to bring those heroes to life, to ensure their identities, accomplishments, and sacrifices live well into the future.
The names in the granite of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial resonate with us all. Those of us who served, those who lost loved ones, those who lived through the divisive era. Behind every name is a face and a story.
We're all scared. One might hide it with his mouth, another with his actions, but we're all scared.
The people they loved.
Tell Kathy if she wants to marry me, it's okay with me. I'll wait forever if I have to. Love, Johnny.
The sacrifice they made.
The things we take for granted can mean so much. The smell of cut grass, the wind blowing over the lake, the bareness of the world during winter.
The Education Center at the Wall will bring these stories to life. It will connect future generations to the lasting impact, the profound insights, and the individual heroes of the Vietnam War. Every visitor upon entering the center will be given a dog tag of someone whose name is on the wall. As they journey through the center, the visitor will be presented with opportunities to interact with the person whose name is on the dog tag. They can learn the soldiers' stories and share in the remembrances left by friends and loved ones, forging a bond between the visitor and the warrior that will have a lasting impact. Visitors will enter a place of civic reflection. They'll begin by walking through a history of America's conflicts from Bunker Hill to Baghdad. The price of freedom is etched on the walls. Patriotism is shown to be timeless. Over 200,000 items have been left at the wall over the years, and finally, the highlights of this living collection will have a proper home. Objects related to soldiers and the things they carried. Final goodbyes and letters between loved ones. Objects of respect from brothers in arms. Keepsakes from parents. A token left by a child for a grandparent they will never meet. The timeline at the Education Center is a unique telling of one of the most significant moments in U.S. history.
Con Thien is here, 2 miles south of the demilitarized zone at the narrow top of South Vietnam, 12 miles inland from the South China Sea.
The visitor is immersed in a rich multimedia experience as their curiosity transports them from the battlefront to the home front and back again. A powerful exhibit called Coming Home shows the homecoming experience in vivid detail.
I can envision it. A small cottage someplace with a dog and a fireplace. And maybe enough money to give myself some Irish coffee now and then.
And the creation of the hallowed ground that would remind us of those who never returned. The Education Center aspires to make every name on the wall visible and give a face to the faceless. Real people are revealed, people who shared the same hopes and aspirations that we all do, people who embodied the values that make this country great. The Education Center at the Wall will be a place for us all to reflect about who we are as a citizen, as a people, as a country, where future generations can connect with those individuals who died for their country and ensure their sacrifices will always be treasured, and that their names will never be forgotten.
We are joined by the chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, John Dibble. John, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell me how this project came about.
Well, it really came about because we, some years ago, had started a program involving teachers in a program called Teach Vietnam. And that still exists. We have teachers all over the country, and the idea was to teach about the Vietnam era because it really was being given about that much type in history books. And because of that, we realized that we needed to do more in the area of education. And we discovered 70% of the people who visit the wall were not even born when the war ended. And so there was not only a misunderstanding about that era, but we also realized that although the wall itself is a very powerful thing, and people are moved by it when they come, younger generations see all those names and they don't appreciate that those were real people with lives, families, friends. And so we started moving toward building an education center so that those visiting the wall could then go to the education center and learn about the people whose names they had just seen on the wall. And so the legislation was passed by Congress in 2002 to build it. It's actually across the street from the wall, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, between there and the Lincoln Memorial. And it's been a project in the making because we've obviously had to raise the money. Right. But when it is completed, it will do several things. First of all, we have been gathering the pictures of everyone whose name is on the wall, all 58,242. And those will be displayed on a large screen every day on the birthday of the people whose names are there. And to give you an idea of the magnitude, it's like 300 a day. Wow, okay. To do that. In addition to which, over the years, there have been articles left at the wall. And it is now approaching 300,000 items which are taken away every day, but they are left at the wall as remembrances, connecting with someone whose name was on the wall. And a lot of those articles tell the story of the person whose name is on the wall. So those are going to be featured, not all 300,000, but the ones connecting to a particular name within the education center to tell the story of a person's life. And so that's what we've been working at, and that's how it came about.
That's phenomenal. What are some of the things that have been left over the years?
Everything has been left. I mean, there obviously are a lot of letters. We've had beer cans or actual beers left because it's like, this is that beer I promised you and never got to give you. A Harley Davidson motorcycle, completely outfitted, was left, and it's in storage now, and it may in fact be in the education center. And there's it goes on and on and on. I mean, it's kind of everything that connects the person who is seeing the name of a friend, a relative, on the wall to that person.
You mentioned that most of the people that come to visit the wall were not born when the war ended. What is the biggest, in maybe your judgment, misunderstanding or misconception that those people have about the war?
Well, I think there are a lot of misconceptions. And I think a lot of it is, first of all, that everybody that came back from the war, just dropped out of society, which is not the case at all, because in fact, the majority of Vietnam veterans went on into society, in the professions, and just in their community and helping. I also think that people may not understand that, first of all, they don't understand about the draft, which was that was the machine that actually drove a lot of things, because certainly when I joined the U.S. Navy, it was either that or I was going to be drafted. There was no choice. There were deferments if you went to school, and there could be deferments for other things, but once those were up, you were going to go. And I just did some research the other day. During the Vietnam War, between 9 and 11% of the U.S. population was on active duty in the military. That figure is now less than 1%. And this has caused kind of a disconnect between the military and civilian populations. But the other thing is that when Vietnam veterans came back, the public had confused the war and the warrior. And I think Vietnam veterans were rejected by society, and as a result, a lot of veterans, and I'd almost include myself in this, you really didn't want to publicize the fact that you'd been in Vietnam.
Why did the public have that confusion?
Well, the war was very unpopular. I mean, there's no question about that. And it became increasingly unpopular as the years went by. And, you know, the demonstrations got bigger. And as I said, they equated the people that were fighting it with the thing they did not like about the war, not realizing that these are not people who had much choice. Right. I mean, certainly people went to Canada to avoid the draft and so forth, but, you know, not everyone took that option. And, you know, I think a lot of Vietnam veterans, when they came back, felt that the war was a bad idea. I mean, I certainly did. Right. But, you know, you couldn't undo that. And that persisted for years. In fact, it's only with the recent conflicts that I think veterans have been welcomed home. And a lot of that, by the way, is because of what was done to Vietnam veterans. And I think people realized it was time to not do that.
And to make it up. I found an interesting quote you made somewhere. It said, everybody was wounded in Vietnam. Everybody. What do you mean by that?
I think everybody was wounded, both those that were in Vietnam and those on the home front. You know, when I wrote that, it was part of an article I wrote, and I said that, you know, a lot of times when I came back, people, one of the first things they'd ask you was, were you wounded? I was not, fortunately, and I'm thankful for that. But sometimes the conversation just ended. Well, if you weren't wounded, then, you know, really not there. And that led me to start thinking about why people had to have some physical manifestation of your service in Vietnam. And then I realized that, in fact, everybody was wounded. And I don't mean non-physical wounds, but I think also people on the home front. It wounded the entire country.
It definitely scarred the country.
Oh, there's no question. No question.
What did you do in Vietnam?
Well, I went in and I was officer in charge of a swift boat. I used to have to tell people what that was, but not anymore. And ran river patrols on the upper Mekong River and its tributaries. And then the war shifted into what they called Vietnamization, and they basically were turning assets over to the Vietnamese. So we turned the swift boats over to them, and I shifted to a different role and became commanding officer of a forward operating base in a place called the U Minh Forest. It had actually been an old French fort, which the French had, I think, quite rightly abandoned, as I was to later find out. And there were a number of types of operations run out. It was a mix of Army and Navy and Marines down there.
I know one of the things you're going to have in the Education Center is a piece on homecoming.
Right.
What was your personal homecoming like?
You know, it's a very interesting question, because everybody's homecoming was different. I came back, and actually with a short break in between, and then I started law school. And, you know, I think everybody came back and figured, well, I could just pick up where I left off. But of course, you really can't if you've just been in a war. Right. But I was asked that one time about, you know, didn't people, resent the fact that you had been in Vietnam? And I said, you know, actually, people were quite nice. And most of my classmates in law school were interested. They wanted to know what had happened. I was not the only Vietnam vet in my law school class, and I think in a way that was a very good transition. I mean, a lot of things from war, particularly if you've been in combat, they linger for a long time. And post-traumatic stress disorder, which now everybody talks about, had not even been given a name at the conclusion of Vietnam. And I think everybody, to some extent, suffered the effects of it, but never knew what it was. And in fact, it was only when vets started talking to other vets, they began to discover some of the commonality. Now that is a recognized disorder, and I think that's helped. But back to what you were saying, that was my transition back, and then I actually went back to my hometown to practice law, which I think was probably good. Probably good.
As you look back, what did you learn from the experience that you've carried with you in life?
I've often thought about what kind of person I would be if I had not gone to Vietnam. And it's easy to say because I came back, I was not wounded, but I don't think I would have been as good a person. I mean, I don't think I'm perfect, but I think had I not had that experience, for one thing, it put you in contact with a lot of people from other backgrounds. I mean, like it or not, the draft was the last universal experience in the United States. We really don't have one anymore. And it forced you to be put in contact with people from different parts of the United States, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And you learned from that, because otherwise I don't think I probably would have been in contact with all those people. It also taught you to respect courage and human endeavor, and frankly, it taught me to really respect Americans. Americans are simply phenomenal. I mean, the things that they do, because my men, I mean, we had to make do with not very much, but the things my men would do, making things, fixing stuff, and helping natives, by the way. And I have thought back about that, and I thought, what a great, great bunch of people Americans are. Yeah. And so I think I never would have had that appreciation.
Let me broaden the question a little bit. What did we as a nation learn from Vietnam?
Well, depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different answer to that question. I think in the big picture that probably we learned, don't get involved in a war with a standing army unless you're prepared to move forward and win it. And secondly, pick your wars carefully. I talk about stupid. I didn't read the history of Vietnam until after I had been in the war. A lot of my friends hadn't either. And when you do, you discover the Vietnamese have never lost a conflict, ever, okay? They've defeated the Chinese 3 times, including Genghis Khan. I mean, and so here we are going in, and then of course the goal, which was supposed to be the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, which at the time seemed like a good idea, but really didn't have any merit to it. So I think it forced us to examine things more carefully. And to this day, whenever we start to get involved in something, you will still hear the phrase, we don't need another Vietnam.
Right, right. Do you think politicians who have not been to war are too quick to want to engage in conflict?
I do. It bothers me because the number of members of Congress that have been in the military is dwindling every year. And I think to make judgments on committing troops to combat without fully appreciating it. I mean, someone once said that every president, if they're contemplating any kind of armed involvement by the United States, should go down at night late and walk along the wall and look at all those names, because it just brings home the cost of that kind of conflict. And I don't mean to say that not having military service doesn't mean that they can make good judgments, but I have certainly seen some committing of U.S. forces without really considering, the effects of it. And I think that bothers a lot of veterans.
Yeah, I can imagine it does. What was it like for you when you were in Vietnam? Did you know what was going on back here in the United States?
You mean in terms of demonstrations?
Demonstrations,
They didn't publicize it very much. Stars and Stripes, when we got copies of it, which was pretty rare, and we had no access to radio or television because we were so far out in the boonies. And so, no, we did not have a good idea of it. My last contact with that, and I will always remember it because talk about optimism, before I went to Vietnam, I decided to take the LSATs so I could apply to law school. Optimistic beyond belief. And I was stationed in the Navy's Inshore Operations Training Center in Vallejo, California, and the place I had to go take it was at Berkeley. Okay, now, I had the look of somebody who was on active duty. My hair was shaved. I had been out in the field. And so I put on a baseball cap and kind of crept into Berkeley, took the LSAT, and got out because Berkeley was a hotbed of anti-war activity. That was probably the last contact I had with it because they did not publicize that. Armed Forces Radio, if you got it, didn't say anything about it, and Stars and Stripes most certainly did not. So I think when you came back, you probably had 1 year of not knowing what had been going on.
Were you shocked when you started finding out what had happened?
I was shocked in the fact that I didn't realize how widespread it had become. Okay. I mean, I went to Columbia University undergrad, Columbia College, and the university was shut down my graduation year, 1968, by riots, some of which had to do with anti-war protests, so I was not unfamiliar with it. But when I came back, I found that had spread, and I think the other thing was, in my mind, the shootings of students at Kent State was a watershed event because suddenly parents and people who might not otherwise not have been involved suddenly said, wait a minute, they just shot a bunch of kids for protesting a war, and all of the population shifted, and it stayed that way. And so, when I came back, yes, it was very widespread.
Once the Education Center is up and built and people will be able to go through, what do you hope they will take away from there?
I hope they'll take away an appreciation of the fact that, first of all, those names were real people. But the other thing we want them to take away is an idea of the sacrifice that's made by people who are in the military in conflict. In fact, we plan to, in addition to the pictures of those whose names are on the wall, also display daily for a period of time the casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan. And we're doing that because there's a law that says that you cannot have your own memorial until 10 years after a conflict ends. And so we're going to make that available to the veterans of our most recent conflicts so they can see it, because that's part of showing people the kinds of sacrifice that are made. And some of the themes in the Education Center are talking about loyalty and patriotism and courage and all of the things that are exhibited by people in the military, because, as I said, so few people now are in the military, and there's this huge gap between the military and the civilian population, and particularly the young ones, and I don't think they really appreciate it. And so we're trying to overcome it. It is an education center. There will not be anything like it in Washington or on the Mall. It's going to be very high-tech and interactive. In fact, we have things that kids with iPhones and Droids and every other thing can actually download stuff, and they can listen to music from the era, and we can constantly change the exhibits because they're all electronic and they're software driven.
Fascinating. You're talking about having the pictures of every name that's on the wall. Now, how is the campaign going gathering those pictures?
Well, we now have, I was just talking to somebody who was with me earlier, but I think we're up to close to 60 or 70% of the pictures. It's the last bunch that are the hardest to get. And so we have a thing called Call for Photos, and we've been to several states, Florida being one of them. And we're asking people to help us find those pictures. You would think it would be easy, but the records that show where somebody was from is where they were from when they went into the service, not where they may have been after that. And finding families. I, for instance, had to find a photo of a young officer who was killed, who had worked out of my base. And I finally put the phrase in, preceded in death by, and put his name, and it popped up on Google. Okay. Because when his parents died, then I could find him, and then I found his sister and found a picture. But that's what it takes, and it's a very painstaking thing. But we're going to get them all. There's no question about that.
What is the time frame? When will the exhibit be open?
Well, we're going to break ground November 28th, and we're going to start building very shortly after that. And so it's about a 2-year process to build the center, get the exhibits set up. So tentatively, we'd like to be open by 2014, which is also, by the way, when our troops are coming back from Afghanistan. And in fact, we would like to welcome them when they do come back.
If people want to find out more about the project, I'm sure you're on the web. Where should they go?
Okay, there's 2 websites. If they want to find out about the center, they can go to buildthecenter.org, or if they want to just find out about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, they can go to vvmf.org, and it has a link then back to the center. And you can find out about the center, you can contribute, which we would certainly appreciate. This is a very expensive project. You can even post pictures there. Okay. And then there's also a virtual wall from that website where you can find names on the wall, and people post remembrances and they put the pictures up. Now that's all going to be incorporated in the Education Center too, but those are the 2 websites.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, very best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your leadership as far as putting the Education Center together. We greatly appreciate it. Thanks for spending some time with us. By the way, you can see more of our conversations online at wsre.org/conversations. All you have to do is click on the Episodes tab. We thank you so very much for watching. I'm Jeff Weeks. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by these corporate sponsors. And by viewers like you.